Have you ever woken up after sleeping too long, feeling groggy and disoriented? That's how I feel at this very moment. But when I opened my eyes, I wasn't expecting to see absolute darkness. Slowly at first, I can feel my anxiety starting to grow. Instinctively, I try to place a hand on my chest. Then, with horror, I realize I have no hand or body for that matter. I'm simply a floating speck of dust drifting in the void. Forcing myself to take deep, calming breaths, I begin looking around my surroundings once more. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Is this hell? If I had eyes, they'd be full of tears. But why would they be? What is hell, and why would I be there? For that matter, who am I? I can think, and some things come to me naturally, like the reflex to grab my chest when I get overwhelmed. But I can't remember anything, not even my own name. I feel so many emotions, but I'm not sure what to do. I can't do anything. My racing thoughts are interrupted as my sight stops on movement underneath the blanket of dust I seem to be floating in. Then my mind is assaulted by a voice, emotionless, raspy, and almost monotone. Most of the souls after reawakening scream. The voice pauses, then continues. What? Oh yes, they'll just scream and scream, for what you would consider days. Then, after I tire of the noise, I devour them. You eat? Yes, I do. Dormant souls feel no pain, nor do they feel fear. They simply just exist. Glancing around again, I take in the millions of specks floating around me. Before you ask, no, they are not all souls. Where do they come from? Everything, and everywhere. From the smallest insect to the tallest tree. Even animals and people have them. Then why? Why did I awaken you? No reason other than I wanted to. Call it boredom. Sometimes I find an interesting soul like yours and want to see who they are. What do you mean? I project my thoughts, and am surprised that the voice seems to understand me. Well, like everything, souls are all different. Take yourself for example. You're significantly larger than all the others. You're also gray instead of colored. What does the color have to do with anything? Oh, not much. However, I've learned that you most likely held onto a strong belief or commitment that never happened, leaving you unfulfilled. But don't a lot of people die like that? Sure, but yours was so strongly a part of you that you never truly accepted it. Lastly, you've been here for so long that you're starting to degrade. Truly remarkable, all things considered. Now, prepare yourself. I'm going to take a deeper look into you to see what I can learn. Oh, but do try to stay conscious. I'm afraid that if you don't, the damage you've sustained will be too great for another awakening. Wait, I begin to say, but then all communication stops. Eerily silent again, the void I'm stuck in catches my attention, until suddenly a soft yellow light starts emerging from beneath the floating souls and other debris. Like a drop of water falling into a pond, a rippling effect starts from the point of light, pushing everything out and away from me. Hello, the voice speaks to me again. Trembling, I look down, only to see a slightly lighter shade of darkness and a massive bloodshot eye staring back at me. The soft glowing orb hovering above me seems to be attached to some kind of appendage coming off the monster, like an anglerfish. Just as the thought crosses my mind, the light at the end of the appendage begins lowering toward me. I screamed for it to stop, then I was riddled with white-hot, searing agony. A vivid memory flickered before him. He saw a little boy, no older than 5, on a sun-drenched lawn. The boy swung a sturdy stick like a sword, its imaginary weight perfectly balanced in his small hands. An old faded towel, tied at the neck, billowed behind him, a makeshift cape. On the back porch, an older woman watched over him, a soft, loving smile on her face as she sat in her rocking chair. The scene blurred and shifted, repeating like a time-lapse film. The same two figures, the boy and the woman, eating meals together, the woman tucking the child into bed, his eyes still wide with the day's heroic adventures. But subtle variations began to appear. The boy grew taller, the woman's movements slower. Eventually, the vision showed the boy, now a teenager, focused intently on notes in the classroom. He'd rush home from school to a much thinner, more frail version of the woman. After cooking and cleaning, they would sit and eat together. Afterward, he would carefully help her to the couch before retreating to a new, brighter screen, wielding swords and magic in a vibrant video game. Yet, their shared smiles were just as bright as they had been years ago. The cycle continued, a montage of passing years. Then, abruptly, the older woman vanished. The boy, now a man, sat alone on the couch, the television screen dark and lifeless. He traded the vibrant games for hardbound books, spending his nights studying and his spare time watching fantasy shows about epic adventures. He graduated at the top of his class and stepped into the world, moving from one job to the next until his home was no longer humble but comfortable. A new figure entered his life, a young woman who moved with a shy, uncertain grace. They began as friends, drawn together by their mutual love of fantasy shows and games. The walls of his house seemed to stretch, the space growing with the warmth of her presence, until the woman was his wife. They were expecting a baby, but the vision twisted into complications, a sudden darkness. The scene dissolved into a cold hospital room, and neither survived. He was alone on the couch again, the TV off. On his lap was an old cardboard box. He opened it to reveal faded photos of a grinning boy with an old towel for a cape, a stick held high. His fingers trembled as he touched the pictures, a memory of a time before the silence. Beneath the photos lay a cold, hard metal barrel. His fingers wrapped around it, the vision ending just as they tightened. "What was that?" he stammered, his voice raw. "A replay of your life," a deep, resonant voice answered. "With how degraded your soul is, what you saw are your core values and memories, the clearest image of who you were. But in your current state, that is all that can be seen." The being's massive, unseen presence loomed. The air crackled with a silent, primal power. "I gave myself to the void, and now the void has a voice," the man thought, his mind racing to process the vision and the creature before him. He suppressed the rising terror. Survival instincts screamed at him to stay silent, to be small, to not provoke the entity that had just laid bare his entire life. "You seem to have an obsession with fantasy, but you lost everything important to you," the voice continued. "Instead of continuing to exist, you gave up and ended your own life. What are you?" The question escaped his lips despite his best efforts to hold it back. "What indeed? Interesting choice of wording." The voice seemed to purr with amusement. "I am what is known as a Void Wyrm." "A dragon? A space dragon? The kind I watched on shows?" His mind, still reeling, latched onto the one familiar concept. "Based on your memories, yes, precisely," the Void Wyrm confirmed, its tone laced with a hint of condescension. "I am one of the oldest, if not the last Void Wyrm in existence. Many things call this place home. However, none of that really matters to someone as insignificant as you." The man's breath caught. He flinched, but the worm did not react. He swallowed hard, the bile of fear and shame rising in his throat. "What will you do with me now?" he asked, the words barely a whisper. I'll give you a choice, of course." "A choice? A choice from a being that just called me insignificant? What could possibly be a fair choice here?" "A choice?" he managed. "Yes, you clearly wanted the things from your memories. How about I send you to a world full of magic and monsters for you to slay?" "What?" The worm ignored his startled outburst. "I will give you the knowledge of a magic lost to that world, a magic known as Golemancy. However, this comes with strings." "Strings? A debt to a reality-bending dragon in a void between worlds? A debt that must be paid with what? My non-existent soul?" "Please explain," he said, forcing himself to sound calm. "There is a race of creatures in the void known as the swarm. They are a hive-mind. I will tell you about the swarm, then a little of the world. By then, I expect you to have an answer for me." The worm's voice took on a new quality, sharp and clinical, as it began to explain. "The swarm are semi-intelligent insectoids. What does this mean, you may be wondering?" The question was rhetorical, a pause for effect. "When they are born, they live by their base instincts: nest, feed, reproduce, expand. They have much in common with ants, except they will throw soldiers at a target until they ultimately destroy everything in their way. The longer a brood mother lives, the more intelligent they become. They've been known to learn entire planetary languages and even cultures. Some have grown smart enough to enslave entire populations to use as cattle after dominating a planet. The worm's words painted a terrifying picture. Brood mothers in their youth are capable of flight and limited movement with their legs. Once they are large enough, they fly out of a planet's orbit and use their psionic abilities to create a type of cocoon to protect themselves from the void. Then they enter a long-term hibernation until crashing into a planet's surface, afterward waking up and determining if the planet is suitable for infestation. For example, is there enough food and water? If they determine the planet is not suitable for habitation, they simply leave and continue searching. They can do this up to 5 times before starving to death. The worm paused, letting the image sink in. Say they land on the perfect planet. They will then remove their own wings and consume them for vital nutrition, then begin to burrow underground. Mind you, in this stage, they are only about the size of a large cow and look like a grub. Perfect for burrowing. Once they are satisfied with the start of the nest, they will seal off the entrance and begin laying eggs. This is the beginning of the end for the planet in question. The first clutch consists of between 15 and 30 eggs. Once hatched, these are called drones. They are much weaker and smaller than their worker or soldier counterparts. However, they are still very dangerous and can easily be bigger than a large dog. Their only reason for existence is to gather food for the brood mother so that she can rapidly change her body, getting to the size or even bigger than a whale. Afterward, she will begin rapidly laying eggs and expanding the nest territory. The planet I will be sending you to is known as Gaia, and it is approximately 4 times the size of your home world, Earth. Almost 1,000 years ago, a brood mother landed on this planet and quickly laid waste to its inhabitants. Many long years of war followed until the inhabitants of Gaia came out victorious. Though sadly, I have felt psionic tremors of late, which can only mean one thing. The people of Gaia did not destroy all the brood mother's eggs. My running hypothesis is that in her last moments, she gave birth to her own brood mother egg and sent some of her minions to protect and hide the egg. Without a living brood mother to quickly incubate it, it has taken this long to hatch. Given the hive-mind nature of the swarm, I would not be surprised if the brood mother didn't impart its memory into the unborn baby. Which means when it hatched, it would have all the knowledge of its mother, making this specific hatchling much more dangerous than its predecessor. Ultimately, the swarm must be stopped whenever possible. If not, it's only a matter of time before they slowly devour every habitable planet in the void. The worm's voice echoed, carrying the weight of a cosmic threat. Now, enough of the swarm. The topic abruptly shifted, leaving the man's mind to momentarily settle, only to be filled with a new deluge of information. Gaia is, as I said, quite larger than your home world, and their technology is much less advanced than what you are used to. What I mean is simple. Their technology and infrastructure are comparable to Earth's late medieval period. However, with magic in the mix, they have a lot more technological innovation than the people of your planet. For example, running water and proper plumbing in the form of showers and toilets. The man's tired mind latched onto the mundane detail of a toilet, a small anchor in the storm of new information. A toilet? Good. Some things are still normal. A little less medieval, maybe. In place of electricity, they have managed to use beast cores to create things like lightning, or batteries for magical contraptions, the worm continued. The government type is typically monarchies or queen regnants. Secondly, there are a few council-run countries. Lastly, you'll also come across a few tribal villages in the more remote places of the world. The worm's formless gaze seemed to sharpen. I mentioned beast cores briefly a moment ago. Let me elaborate on the ecosystem of Gaia. There is a wide variety of flora and fauna. Some you'll be familiar with, but much more you've never imagined. Overworld monsters like goblins or griffins have a chance of possessing monster cores inside their bodies when slain. These are worth monetary value across most of the planet. On the other hand, living dungeons do not produce monsters with cores. However, they do produce rewards in the form of chests containing treasure, such as weapons and armor. These places are typically always changing and evolving, making them highly dangerous but a great way to advance your skills along with your gear. He felt his consciousness begin to waver, the worm's words becoming more distant, muffled. The immense pressure of the worm's presence combined with the raw exposure of the void was taking its toll. Lastly, there are many races that call Gaia home. Humans populate roughly 50% of the total population, followed by beast folk, then dwarves, and lastly elves. The most common means of combat is hand-to-hand or using various melee weapons, like swords, spears, and many others. Archery, slings, and other simple ranged weapons are most common for distance fighting outside of magic or siege equipment. Finally, there is magic. There are many different types of spells, most commonly elemental combat spells like throwing fireballs, stones, or water whips. Then there is support magic, like buffs, shields, and healing magic. The final and rarest magic is enchantment. A little bit about magic. Only 10% of people are born with a mana core. These odds can be increased if 2 people with mana cores reproduce. However, this is only true for humans and demi-humans, who can be born with either or both of their parents' magical abilities. Humans and demi-humans can also be born with any and all magical elements. Elves are mostly only attuned to earth and water magic. Dwarves are fire and earth. But all races have a chance to be born with the ability to use support magic or even enchantment magic. I see that you're beginning to fade. The worm's voice changed, its clinical tone replaced by a hint of concern. Are you still with me? Everything feels fuzzy, and I'm starting to feel tired again. But yes, please continue, he mumbled, his vision blurring around the edges. The massive eyes seemed to narrow slightly, then relax. You've done well to last this long in your state. I will finish up shortly. Mana cores come in 5 grades, gray being the weakest, then red, blue, yellow, and white. They all start as a dull version of themselves, but much like muscles, they will expand and begin to glow more brightly as they are used. It's very important to remember that when you advance from one stage to another, it will be unpleasant. But remember to keep using your core, otherwise it will degrade over time. Keep in mind, though, that a core will never downgrade. When you've spent all your mana, you will feel extreme exhaustion, but the core is always pulling in ambient mana. The larger and higher ranked your core is, the faster this process occurs. Extreme exhaustion? Like this? Is this what mana exhaustion is like? He tried to think, but his thoughts dissolved into a hazy fog. Finally, we come to you. He tried to focus, to perk up at the direct address, but no matter how hard he tried, everything seemed to be spinning and darkening around him. You come from a world with no mana. You have no core. This said, though, I believe I can give you another dose of my power before sending you to your new body. This excessive energy should be enough to kickstart your mana core, or you'll explode the moment your soul makes contact with your new vessel. Well, what? He managed to choke out. Lastly, the knowledge of Golemancy. I will simply impart the knowledge I have on it into your soul. You can just... He trailed off, his words barely a mumble as the darkness in his vision consumed most of his sight. I suppose this couldn't be helped. His soul was already greatly damaged. I should finish things up before time runs out. The worm's voice was now a deep rumble that vibrated through the fabric of the void. Thank you for this conversation, little one. It has been pleasant. I suspect that in the moments to come, you'll experience excruciating pain. However, I hope that you do not die. Hear my name, mortal soul, boomed the voice of Harthax, its sound filling the vast emptiness. Harthax, expander and caretaker of the void, seeder of worlds, passes into you a fragment of my power. A softly glowing, pulsing yellow appendage lowered towards the faintly luminous soul, slowly encompassing it. With the soul now held firmly, Harthax brought the appendage closer to its massive, energy-pulsing eye. With a single, deliberate blink, the worm retracted the golden orb, then launched the now vibrantly glowing soul through the void at a speed beyond comprehension. A dazzling golden trail was left in its wake, scattering asteroids that dared to cross its path. For the protagonist, everything had long since gone black. The last coherent memory was the name Harthax, followed by nothingness. He was barely conscious, feeling a profound, deep vibration coursing through what was left of his existence. The sensation intensified, becoming a searing, golden-hot agony that made the very concept of pain seem inadequate. He felt himself stretching, tearing, and reforming, a metamorphosis powered by the worm's raw energy. His last conscious thought was a fleeting prayer that he would not simply burn into nothing. The golden streak of light continued its journey, finally settling on a large, vibrant planet of green and blue. It oriented itself and began its descent, blazing a fiery path through the outer atmosphere. In a small, dilapidated village nestled in a clearing, two sisters watched the night sky. The youngest, May, barely 10 years old, pointed a trembling finger. "Look there, a shooting star!" she exclaimed to her older sister. Juno, 17 and far more worldly, shot to her feet, her eyes wide with a different kind of recognition. That was no star. That was a hurtling, fiery orb, a falling star that had made a slight adjustment to its path, its descent controlled. A tremor in the earth, subtle at first, then growing into a violent shockwave, announced its arrival. The sisters watched in absolute horror as the fireball slammed into the nearby forest only a few miles away, a soundless concussion of light and earth shattering the night. Juno clutched at her chest, the air thick with dust and magic. "Come on, May, we need to get home and tell Mother." "Okay, Juno." "Hey, Juno." "That was scary." "What was that?" "I don't know," Juno replied, but before she could formulate a response, a tremendous column of pure golden light erupted from the forest. It pierced the sky, a beam so intense and so high that it seemed to disappear into the clouds, a beacon visible for miles. "Run!" Juno screamed, and the two girls fled, their bare feet pounding across the field towards the small village, their youthful innocence shattered by the awesome, terrifying display of power. Far off in the distance, atop a stone tower overlooking a sprawling city, a man stood, his face a mask of smug superiority. Robes of dark velvet cascaded from his shoulders, and a tall, pointed hat sat upon his head. "Look at all these powerless peasants, just living their lives," he sneered to a servant girl standing dutifully behind him. "If it weren't for the academy, they'd be nothing more than food for the beasts we protect them from. Isn't that right, Meat?" The servant flinched slightly at her enforced name. "My name is Isabella, not Meat, you insufferable pig," she thought to herself, a burning resentment flickering beneath her calm facade. "Answer me when I'm talking to you, slave," the man snarled, spinning around. He slapped her hard enough to send her sprawling to the stone floor. Her tail, no longer hidden by her now untucked waistcoat, gave a sudden, involuntary twitch, and a feline ear poked through her disheveled hair. Before he could escalate his tirade, the night sky was illuminated by the soft golden glow of the distant pillar. The man, Master Gray, his cruelty momentarily forgotten, spun back around, his hands gripping the stone railing. He was mesmerized by the magnificent golden column, a spectacle that momentarily silenced the great city below. "Meat," he growled, the single word a command. "Get me a quill and paper. I must send word to the headmaster and prepare to figure out what that was." "Yes, Master Gray," the servant replied, bowing slightly before turning to leave. "Not before you clean yourself up," Gray hissed. "I will not have you disgracing these halls with your demi-filth." "Yes, of course, Master." Gray's eyes, fixed on the now fading light, glittered with ambition. "This could be huge for our family. Father will be delighted if I can bring back an artifact that fell from the sky," he thought, a cruel laugh escaping his lips. "This is perfect." In the opposite direction from Gray's academy, another, much larger city rested, a perfectly circular metropolis dominated by a grand white castle at its northernmost point. But in the city's very center, an equally impressive church stood, its numerous high towers reaching towards the heavens. Inside one of these towers, a mature and regal-looking woman stood gazing out the window. Though she couldn't be much older than 25, she exuded an air of timeless grace. Her long golden hair framed a face of perfect composure, and her piercing blue eyes reflected the golden light that washed across the sky. She wore a pristine white robe trimmed with gold, emblazoned with a large red cross, and one hand, adorned with a delicate white glove, rested over her heart. She gasped as the golden beam seemed to descend from the very heavens to grace Gaia's earth. The sacred spectacle broke the spell, however, when a knock sounded at her door. The look of awe and shock instantly vanished, replaced by an expression of steely determination. "You may enter," she commanded. A group of older men, all priests, funneled into the room, their faces alight with excitement. "High Priestess," one of them stammered. "The light, is it a sign from God?" The High Priestess took one last, longing glance at the now quickly fading light before turning to the priests. "Prepare the holy order and inform the king," she commanded, her voice firm and clear. "We leave at dawn." Gasps of bewilderment and shock crossed the faces of the priests. "But your father will never allow you to leave the capital, Your Highness," one man hesitantly spoke up. The High Priestess' gaze hardened. "My father cannot meddle in the affairs of the church, and I'm not royalty anymore. I am the High Priestess of the Church of Saul. You do well to remember that." "Yes, High Priestess," the priests replied in unison, bowing deeply before hurrying out of her chambers. Turning back to the window, she placed a hand on the cool glass and closed her eyes. "I'm no longer Grace Lionsmane, first princess of the Lionsmane Kingdom," she thought, her internal voice a defiant whisper. "I am Grace, High Priestess of Saul. I will not be used as a political bargaining chip ever again." Far off from the epicenter of the great beam, a lone elf perched high in a tree, his wide eyes catching the barest glint of the distant light. He was a master of the forest, and before the light even had a chance to vanish completely, he was already descending the tree with nimble, silent movements. Sprinting into the gloom of the dimly lit forest, illuminated by soft, glowing fungus and vines, his cool, monotone voice broke the silence. "I must warn the royal family." On an equally distant mountaintop, an old dwarf lay on his back, haphazardly holding a tankard of half-spilled ale. Rolling over and propping himself up on his knees, a delighted chuckle rumbled in his chest at the spectacular sight before him. "It seems things might just get interesting again," he declared. A 6-foot-tall stone humanoid, its red eyes glowing, knelt beside him, an attentive servant. "That's enough, you pile of rubble," the dwarf grumbled playfully. "I'm capable of getting off the ground myself." He dusted himself off and took in his magnificent masterpiece, a handcrafted stone golem, built from the finest materials. He shook his head in feigned disappointment. "But you'll never do anything I don't program you to do myself, though, will you?" Turning his back on the motionless golem to take in the last of the fading light, he announced, "All righty then. Come along, there's work to be done."